So I was asked to speak about Creative Mornings. This month I was flattered, of course, and then I was told that the subject was ugly, and took a little bit away. But you know, I know it's not really a personal appearance subject. That being said, I did get my hair cut yesterday, and special thank you to Ryan Batten from Men at Work. He should be here. So talking about ugly, I started to think about what ugly really means. And so I tried to think about, to try to define what is ugly, I thought, what is the opposite of ugly? And you probably all got your name tags, and I'd be interested to hear and see what people choose for their name tag. But I started to think at first, maybe ugly, the opposite of ugly would be pretty. Or, things are kind of, but pretty seems kind of like, not really as, it doesn't have the same weight that ugly has. So I thought maybe it would be beauty. And so beauty has been a subject that I started to kind of think about. I realized that there's a lot of opposites of ugly, because ugly can describe, again, I'm not going to really talk about people's appearance, but it can be appearance, it can be attitudes, it can be ideas, it can be language. There's a lot of things that could be considered ugly, but for the purpose of this conversation, I'd like to talk about, what is ugly and what is beautiful. And I think that a lot of times, what we consider to be ugly, for example, this here, is a photograph I took in Hong Kong, in Kowloon. It's some back alley. I was just fascinated. Kowloon is the craziest place I've ever been in my life, by far. But so much, everything just drips, by the way. If you go there, look for the puddles and walk around, because we call it getting 28 days later. But if you look at this, for instance, this took years and years and years, to rust away, to create this, something that you might consider to be pretty ugly, pretty terrible. I looked at it and said, this is awesome. I want to take pictures, I wanted to paint it. But this happens sometimes in my paintings. I take pictures of something and it doesn't need to be painted. It doesn't need any help. It's already just its own thing. So I started to think about ugliness. Maybe it's, things are being worn out, beat up, broken. You get these kind of wear and tear that comes along, and eventually you get, there's some old pair of shoes you got to toss out, or, you kind of waste a lot of things when they get to be old and beat up and used up and ugly, and you throw them away. And I started to think about what is beauty, and I was thinking about my buddy up here, John Keats, and he wrote a poem around 1820 or so, when he was 23 years old. It kind of makes me feel bad. But a pretty famous poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, where he says in the second half of the last stanza, we'll see if I can remember it. He says, old age shall set our generation to waste. Thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man to whom thou say'st, truth is beauty, beauty truth, that is all you know on earth and all you need to know. He says, truth is beauty, beauty is truth. So what does that mean? What is true? What is, if that's beautiful? So I started to think about my shoes. This is a great pair of shoes, all right? I like to, people that know me know I got a few pairs of Red Wing boots. I love them, made in America, good quality. They really get the job done, And looking at, looking on Zappos or something, you see these, or you see a new pair of shoes, and it's beautiful, it's just the craft and everything. It's so nicely done. But then you look a few years later, and they're maybe not as beautiful. And I've worn these boots for years and years, mostly in my studio, painted all the murals I've done, usually wearing these boots. You can see I spilled a pretty decent amount of saguaro green on one of them. I managed to mop it off the floor of Death and Taxes, and I'm sorry, James. But I don't think anybody ever noticed. I didn't notice until I got home and went to take off my shoes. But so I kind of think that this is beautiful in a different way because it is worn in and it has been used, and these boots have achieved their purpose. These boots are full of potential. You know, you could do a lot with them. They look really slick, but these are full of history and they're full of use. So if beauty is truth and truth is beauty, what could be truer than an object being used for its purpose? What could be better than something that is designed to serve a purpose and then is used for that purpose, used up for that purpose, and it becomes basically fulfilling its destiny. So I started thinking maybe that's beautiful. If you're used up for your purpose on life, you're full of purpose and give everything you've got and more. Maybe that's beautiful. And then I started to think about poor Boxer and Animal Farm. And it really always bothered me that they sent him off to the glue factory at the end. And I thought, that's not beautiful. So maybe not that far. We don't want to get totally used up, right? But enough used up that, like, these boots are so comfortable. Like, there's not, they form your foot. They're worn in, not worn out. So I started to think about the idea of something being worn in versus being worn out. And good design being something that could be used and used and used and used. Probably one day get them resold, but for the purposes of this lecture. And I got this sign up in my house. It used to be on the side of this building, right out there where the parking lot is. And when I was working for Anthony Ulinsky over at Dovetail Woodworks, I drove by it every single day on my way to work. And I always just thought it was the most beautiful sign in the world. I don't know exactly why. I thought that at the time, but like I said, when they did the demolition to redo Cam, Cam was nice enough to call me and say, okay, you can have the sign. And I ran over here, and I stood on the back of my truck, and I got a socket wrench, and I took it down, and it is so heavy, you would not believe. I almost broke my arm. But what I love about it is that you can see the evidence of craftsmanship in here. You can also see that sometimes the slickness of beauty washes away. For those of you who are painters, you know that you mix your paint with a certain medium. If it's acrylic, it's water. If it's oil, it could be linseed oil or something. So this was obviously painted in oil. It was obviously painted by a sign painter, and you can see where the paint was thick and where it was thin. You can see that when he or she got to the G, they were almost done, and they really thinned the paint down pretty heavily, so that 30, 40 years later, the paint starts to wash away. You can see where the heavy paint was, like on the A and the K. And if you see this thing in real life, if you ever come to my house, you can actually see like the strokes of the brush. And when this was completed, I'm sure it looked slick and it was perfectly fine. But as time wore on, the real history of this piece started to come out. So I think that's beautiful. I think that this probably looked like, probably had a nice look to it when it was made, but nothing to compare to how great it looks now. And that, to me, is the wearing in, and the history and the story that comes in it, I think, is what really makes it nice. So I do murals, and I have been doing that for the past year. I like working large scale. My sign painting was actually, that sign that we just looked at was a big inspiration for it. I like painting in all its forms, But mostly, for those of you that don't know me or haven't seen my work, I like to paint old buildings and old spaces. I was at the School of Architecture in school design, and I always really liked site research. I liked knowing about what was here. This is my friend Stacy's dad's house out in eastern North Carolina. It's where he grew up. He was born, came home to this house, lived his whole, most of his life there. They still have it. And for his 70th birthday, Stacy and me drove out there, and I took pictures, and I did this painting for him. And what I like is that it is old and worn out, and this is not a beautiful house. You would not show this if you were a real estate agent to someone. But when he saw it, he cried because it was his home, and it was something that he felt so attached to. And again, that to me is beautiful. Here we have, again, something that is, to many people, maybe driving down the road, you might feel like this is an ugly structure. But to him, it was heartbreaking. He wrote me the nicest thank you note I think I've ever gotten in my life, one of them anyway. This is probably one of my favorite paintings I've ever done. This is the parking lot behind Cup of Joe. Now, again, parking lot is not something that you would think of to be a subject of a painting, right? It's very utilitarian. They're full of trash, you know, but I've gone to Cup of Joe a lot, and I've lived around the corner. And I actually used to live like right here on Daisy Street for the longest time, always staring at the tractor sign. And I did a series of paintings a few years ago that were all the places in Raleigh that really had a lot of sentimental value for me. And this is one of them, just because, you know, back when I was a kid, like going on Hillsborough Street, like just was something so exciting, you know. And as I got older and continued to go, so much happens in this parking lot. So many kind of, you know, conversations that might have just kind of taken place, people coming and going. I just think it's a really great space that no one would really document because no one really cares about the parking lot. You look at the front of the building, maybe not the back of the building. This is, I don't even know what this is. I know it's in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was visiting my grandparents and I took the rental car and went and drove around and found all kinds of great stuff by the river. And it's, again, you know, this is a chain link fence around some industrial like tanker. It's got, again, the asphalt and parking lot. I find beauty there because it is true. Again, like Keith said, there's not a lot of, you know, they're not putting on a show for you. This is it. This is what it looks like. It gets the job done. And I think that there's a beauty in that. I was up with Ashley actually in New York. We were doing that James Beard dinner. And I climbed out of off the balcony of the hotel and went across a couple rooftops to take these pictures. Found out later this is glass, and I was and I was standing on it, but the trip could have ended a lot differently. But again, here we have the roof of a building and this old water tower. Not typically the kind of thing you would think of as beautiful, but who hasn't been to New York and seen like these water towers? They represent, you know, a feeling. I have this painting, you know, it's one of those paintings that I could have sold 100 times because people see it and they love that water tower and it just speaks to them. And why? It's not because water towers are beautiful in any way. It's because they're real and they're a utilitarian thing and they exist because we exist and we need them just like telephone poles and railroad tracks and stairways and all the other things I love to paint. I'm going to go back for a second. We'll leave it here. So, how am I doing on time? Things are good? So, talking about, you know, what is worn in, what is worn out is one way to look at it. And there's other things I thought of, you know, that would be beautiful or not ugly. And really, the more I thought about it, I realized that what ugly is just like what attractive is. It's not, there's not a standard for it. There's not the same thing to any two people. What I find attractive, someone else might not. What I find ugly, someone else might not. I started to make a list of things that I thought were ugly. And it was, honestly, most of the things on the list I realized were just gross. Like, they weren't really, like mold is like gross, you know, it's not really that, I guess it's kind of ugly too. And then I realized, you know, I kept on thinking about it and realized that it's such a personal thing, so it's hard to say what is really ugly. As I said before, there are some things that we could probably agree universally are ugly, and they're ideas, you know, and I don't go too far into that, but, you know, like injustice, I think, would probably be something that you would consider being ugly. Same thing as you might say that, you know, love or something was beautiful. But really, I think that ugliness, as we see it, or as we're discussing it here, is in the eye of the beholder. And whereas a lot of people might look and see a parking lot and see trash and think this is terrible, I look at it and I see, you know, what has happened here, or, well, that's not true. I don't see what has happened here, but I feel it, and I think that it's a universal experience that we all feel. And I think that probably most of us go through our lives and go through our day-to-day, and we're kind of concerned with what was on our mind or what's on our schedule for that day, and we don't really look around and see what's around us. And sometimes, you know, like I said, I've enjoyed painting the murals, and if you're driving down Hillsborough Street and see the Royal Crown Cola mural, it's hard to miss it because it's so big and it's so red. Some people have even said that it's too red, which was actually what Sherwin-Williams told me. They said, they said, this red is too red. I said, how can that be possible? I still don't really understand it, but just so you know, that's about as red can be. But not everything jumps out at you like that, and not everything presents itself in such a way that it says, look at me. A lot of times you have to kind of look for it. And in my paintings, I call that rewarding the careful viewer, actually an idea that I got from Lope Max Diaz, my painting teacher. Because everybody's going to look at your work, and they're going to see the subject, and they're going to see, for this, you look at it, you see the water tower. But there's rewards for careful viewers. It's not easy to see here. In real life, it is easier. But you can see there's, things kind of tucked into here. There's right here is the back pocket of a pair of Raleigh denim jeans. It's like, the denim. It's not like the pocket. It's just like what tucked into the back pocket. Up there, I've got a page of some of my brother's drawings. There's a, Hello Kitty Band-Aid box that actually came from the drugstore. I think Lauren or somebody cut her finger while they were working, and I had to go get Band-Aids. I thought it'd be funny to get the Hello Kitty ones, but nobody blinked an eye. They just kept on working. But so the reward for the careful viewer is that it is in life too, and it is if you're walking down the street and you see this, a lot. I recently have been very obsessed with painted roads. So no parking, parking spaces, just the ways that people paint roads. And I think it's because of doing the murals and doing the sign working and just trying to see all the different ways that people have painted their environment. And I'm going to approach the city and ask them if they'll start letting me be the guy that paints all the fire hydrants, because I think that would be a pretty cool job. But so thinking about beauty too, when I was asked to do this talk, I started to do some research. But for me, research isn't necessarily like Googling what is ugly. I like to turn to the classics. And so Edna St. Vincent Millay, one of my favorite poets of all time, what does Edna have to say about this? We know what John Keats said when he was 23. Well, when Edna was approaching her 30s, she was already the biggest thing in poetry, but she was starting to feel like she was losing her looks. And so she wrote a poem called Euclid Alone Has Looked on Beauty Bare. And I'm going to try to recite it. I've got it written down in case I can't. But she said, Euclid alone has looked on beauty bare. Let those who prate of beauty hold their peace and lay them prone upon the ground and cease to ponder on themselves the while they stare at nothing intricately drawn nowhere in shifting shapes of lineage. Let geese gabble and hiss, but heroes seek release from dusty bondage into luminous air. O blinding hour, O terrible day, when first into his vision shone light anatomized, Euclid alone has looked upon beauty bare. Fortunate they who, though once and then but far away, have heard her massive sandal set on stone. And what Edna is saying there is that you can talk about beauty all you want, and you can ponder on yourself. So you can stare at yourself in the mirror. You can wonder why you're getting old and you're getting wrinkles and your hair is turning gray and your beauty is disappearing before your very eyes. But she says Euclid alone has seen true beauty because he, for those of you who don't know, Euclid is considered one of the fathers of geometry. He was the first to see the perfection in geometry, the perfection in the natural order of how the world is made. It was valued before him. It was maybe even understood by some individuals, but he set it down and wrote it down and said, this is true, this is real. This is not something that you can actually see. Math is, you can see a math problem, but mathematicians tell me if I'm wrong, these are just symbols that are representing ideas. The idea of mathematics and of geometry and of that perfection is something that exists only in the ether. It doesn't exist in real life. And what Millet is saying is that only he has actually seen beauty. When he saw that shaft of light and he saw light anatomized, he got a glimpse. And she describes it and says, "Oh, blinding hour, oh, terrible day." Like, that's it. He's seen beauty. Everything else is just less than that after then, right? But what she was trying to say is that true beauty, and in this, like I said, she was almost 30, wow, and feeling like she was losing her looks, and but her beauty that she felt and she was trying to assert to herself and to us, obviously, was that the true beauty was something that was inside. And then I would argue that if that is true, if true beauty is something that is inside of us, well then really ugliness is something that would be inside of us too. And that the ugliness would be, like I said, attitudes and ideas, prejudice, things like that, that really keep us from seeing the truth that is around us, that Keats and Millet, 100 years apart, both like in their 20s, seem to have kind of nailed down the same idea that what is true is beautiful. And if it looks ugly, like a pair of old shoes or a parking lot or whatever, you're just not looking at it right, or maybe you just don't appreciate it for what it really is, for what the truth of it is. Now, I promise I wouldn't talk the whole time about The Simpsons, but for those of you that know me, it's hard for me to go more than 20, 30 minutes without mentioning something that I saw in The Simpsons. And I think that they are, there's some really good ideas in there. And for those of you who know and those of you who don't, Mo Sizlak, Mo the bartender, my kindred spirit in Springfield, there's an episode where he decides to get plastic surgery because he's so ugly. And he says, "Plastic surgery, eh?" He said, "Maybe I should dynamite old Mount Crapmore here and see if they can build me a new kisser." And Carl says, "Well, Mo, plastic surgery might make you look good on the outside, but on the inside, you'll still feel bad." And Mo says, "But I'll look good on the outside?" And he says, "Yeah, but you'll still feel bad on the inside." And he says, "Plastic surgery it is." So, I mean, it's funny, but it is kind of true that it's the way that our society is. We value beauty, we value these, magazine covers and airbrushed photographs, when really it's the reality, the cold, hard reality. And, sometimes the ugly truth of the matter is what we cannot get away from and what we shouldn't get away from, and I think that we should really embrace. This last picture up here is another one of my favorite paintings I've done. And it is, again, right back here behind these buildings. It's the Dillon Supply Company, subject of a lot of my paintings. This, to me, I think is just a beautiful space. Like, who knows what's happened here? This used to be a booming, industrial area. People came and went, ate their lunches, fought with their coworkers, or did all kinds of things that we'll never know about. But the residue, that spiritual residue, is still here. And I could find beauty in that. I don't think it's ugly. You could tell me that you think my paintings are ugly, and that's fine. I don't really care. But so I hope that that's been a good, kind of my ideas on what ugliness is, what beauty is. I don't really try to be an authority on ugly. I do appreciate being asked to speak on the subject. If someone else is asked to give a lecture on handsome next month, I will probably be offended. But for now, I thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate it.
Your Hillsborough Street mural, how do you feel about that being so fresh and so new, but it's based off of an old?
That's a great question.
Product?
Some people have said, I think it would look better if you sandblasted it, or if it looked old. And that's basically the opposite of everything I just said, right? Because if you wear something in on purpose, purposefully worn in jeans, just don't make any sense, right? They're expensive. They're going to wear out. You know, like you're going to need new jeans eventually. Let's not fast forward. But what I like about that mural, and James and I agreed on this, is that that's what it looked like when the building was made, right? And it did fade. And I love seeing the ghost signs around Raleigh that are kind of still there. I recently redid the Boylan Pierce sign on Salisbury Street as well. And that was easier than knee-high because it was still there. And I had a photograph of it, but you could also get away from it and you could see the letters. Very weird font, by the way. And the knee-high building was just a bare brick wall, I think, based on like one photograph that was from an angle. And got it as close as I could, looking like the original did. And what I would hope is that the building remains in use for years and years, and that 20 years from now, it is worn down, and it's worn down naturally from the sun and the weather. And if that happens, naturally, it'll look like the parking sign, because I tried my hardest, I used the best paint I could, but it's going to wear out, and it's going to wear out unevenly, and you couldn't sandblast it unevenly and make it look like it really got worn out. It would look like it was kind of faked, So considered it, decided to let nature do her thing. Yeah?
Can you say where some of your murals are?
Well, to be truthful, there's only one real mural, and that would be on Salisbury Street on the south wall of the new Death and Taxes building. 200 South Salisbury. And it's on the parking lot facing the News and Observer, and that's the maze of fire escapes that I made. I chose fire escapes because there's not a lot of them in Raleigh. They are of an urban vernacular, something that you see in most cities. For those of you who aren't engineers or architects, Raleigh is basically made on sand and clay, and it's difficult to make very tall buildings. So without tall buildings, you don't really need fire escapes. There still are a few around and I can tell you where probably all of them are. But I thought it would be a cool graphic, and I wanted something on that large wall to be very graphic and but also be kind of fun and whimsical. And it is a maze. If you do see it at the top, there is a window, and if you start at the window and try to make your way to the ladder at the bottom, it is a maze, which is I've also always loved mazes. But that would be the one that I would say was really the mural, because that was my design. I executed it. I did the whole thing. I mean, I had help. My brother Sean helped me paint it a lot too. But the design, as far as that goes, that was mine. The knee-high building on Hillsborough Street, the Royal Crown Cola, I consider it a mural because it was so much work. It's a sign restoration. The Boylan Pierce on Salisbury Street is also a sign restoration. And then I was lucky enough to have the guys at Cup of Joe let me repaint their sign too, for a lot of coffee. For probably the next few years. But I love those guys and I love that business, and so I was happy to do it for them. So yeah, mostly on Hillsborough Street. I'm actually talking right now with the people at Lulu about redoing the North Carolina Equipment Company sign, the tractor that's over there, which I have painted probably a dozen times in my paintings. I kind of was hoping to get back in the studio, but it's hard to say no to repainting a sign that I've painted so many times. But right now I'm trying to see if they'll let me put it back to where it was originally, and if I can do that, then I'll be all about it. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming out, y'all.
Yeah, thanks again.